Hello, welcome. My name is Surat Rathgebe-Kanan and I'm the founder of the pioneering oral history project Rainbow Jews, celebrating LGBT Jewish history and heritage in the UK.
I'm Rabbi Mark Solomon, and for many years I've been leading the World AIDS Day Chavurah, the monthly service at the end of November, to mark World AIDS Day for the Jewish Gay and Lesbian group, JGLG. And a central feature of that Chavurah every year for many years now has been this quilt, popularly known as an AIDS quilt. It was part of what's called the Names Project, which started off in the early 90s to remember, to create memorials in cloth for people who died as a result of HIV/AIDS, mainly in the United States, but also in Britain. And this particular quilt was made by a very dear friend named Mark. It wasn't to remember just one person, like most of the quilt squares. It was to remember all the people, the many people he knew from the 80s and 90s who died as a result of AIDS. And that's why he made this quilt, as you can see, with all the Hebrew letters and all the English letters, the Hebrew letters in the middle and all the English letters around the border, so that everybody's name is contained in this quilt, all the people that he wanted to remember, that any of us would want to remember. And everything about this beautiful quilt is filled with symbolism, the way Mark designed it. It's made of denim. Denim, he felt, was very symbolic of gay life and gay culture. Yeah, denim jeans, blue jeans. But also all the sequins and pearls representing the exuberant side. Drag culture. Mark himself was a bit of a drag queen various times in his life. And so that's what all the sequins symbolise. But of course, the sequins are in the rainbow colours of the rainbow flag, and in the shape of a menorah, candelabrum, which symbolises light, the light of God, the light of hope and the light of memory. So the little flames in diamante at the top of each of the rainbow candles. And it's all growing out of a dove of peace.
Well, I guess, I knew, like many people, that I was actually a lesbian. I knew from when I was, I guess, in my teens, but I never, unfortunately, did anything about it. And I had my first sexual experience with a woman when I was, I think, about 35. And, again, like so many others, I think, I just couldn't believe that there were other Jewish lesbians. And actually, I had no involvement. I didn't marry the two parts of my life. I didn't marry the Jewish bit, I didn't marry the lesbian bit, really until, I suppose it was mid-1990s when I met Ellie at a service. I'd seen an advert in a magazine that used to exist called New Moon. It was kind of like a Jewish Time Out, and there was an advert in there for a Jewish lesbians synagogue service, Shabbat morning service, and I went along, and I'd heard about this lesbian rabbi, Ellie Sarah, and I went and I met her, and she put me in touch with the Jewish Gay and Lesbian group. And I was, I don't know, might meet somebody I know there, and she sort of said, well, you meet somebody you know there, they're there for the same reason as you, which of course made perfect sense. And I did go along, and I was the only woman there, and just over the years, more and more women have joined, and I actually then began to get heavily involved in the group, and I met my partner there nearly 13 years ago. We've had our civil partnership, and Ellie did our covenant of love 6 years ago, and so I've managed to marry up, and never thought I would, those two parts of my life which are so important to me, being a lesbian but equally being Jewish. And it's like coming home, and it's probably the best decision in my life that I ever made.
As you can probably see, I'm transgender, and it was a struggle. My gender identity in my early teens was a huge struggle. that was some 40 plus years ago, and living nowadays, we live in a far more understanding and tolerant society than maybe it was all that time ago. So I was confused, I was ashamed of my gender incongruence within my own mind, and did my best to push it away and not deal with that.
I came into the Jewish LGBT community properly because I wanted to find a boyfriend. I have found a boyfriend now. He's not Jewish, and so some of the draw that there was isn't there anymore. Part of the reason why I used to come to events was in the hope that I might meet someone. I don't need to meet anyone now. So what would I be? I'm coming for different reasons, I suppose. But it was a very great way of me. It was like the Jewish LGBT community was a real kind of rock to help me get through what was quite an upsetting breakup. When you split up with someone after being with them for 7 years in a conventional heterosexual relationship, very likely people got married, maybe even had a child by that point. And many of my friends who were straight, who've been in relationships from the same age that I was, are married and have children, and I felt very alone. And so a good way of meeting new people was going to Jewish LGBT things, principally because it meant that you had a double affinity.
I think the starting point was I just wanted to be who I was. And I took my Jewishness for granted because we weren't synagogue-going Jews, but we did Friday nights. My mum sang Hebrew and Yiddish songs, and that was very much part of me. But the thing that I was really committed to was kind of radical politics, because somehow, knowing that I was different, but I didn't know how to describe that difference, I identified with any people that was other and different and persecuted. And I was particularly sort of supportive as a very young teenager of the Black Power movement in America and anti-apartheid, and anything that was about other people being oppressed was somehow, that was the way I sort of described what it was, because I couldn't come out to my family. It just didn't seem, I didn't know what it meant really to be who I was, being different as a teenager, having had to leave the boy behind that I had sort of identified with. But then as things developed and I discovered the women's liberation movement, it actually came through in really realising, now I'm at home, I'm with my sisters, and then realising that with my sisters, actually there was a part of me that wasn't there, that wasn't acknowledged, or I got people saying, you talk too much, and all sorts of little things which were actually about being Jewish, or why do you have to be so intellectual, and and they weren't saying don't be Jewish, but they were saying something about me being Jewish. And then there was actually a very big event, and that was the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, and this unleashed a huge kind of a reaction in the left press, but also in feminist press. And there were two journals, Spare Rib and Outright, which is a black women's newspaper, and they all jumped on the anti-Zionist bandwagon. And, I was also critical of Israeli policy, but it's not the same as suddenly turning it into something where Jews somehow have to explain themselves. And this is what began to happen. And I'd already got involved because we had the first Jewish feminist conference, as Jewish women finding one another and feeling that feminism wasn't really expressing all of who we were and allowing us to be ourselves. And then through that met other Jewish lesbians and formed a Jewish lesbian group. And as a Jewish lesbian group, we actually tackled Spare Rib and Outright, directly. The things like Begin is Hitler. He was the Prime Minister of Israel at the time, and you couldn't say you were Jewish without having to defend Israel. It was stuff that's going on today. But what it did was it made me feel, I'm experiencing all this hostility, but actually what does it mean for me to be a Jew? I left Hayden when my brother was bar mitzvah. I was 8.5 years old at the time. So I felt Jewish, but what did I know about being Jewish really? So I decided I needed to explore that more. And when I'd left my husband, I actually went to Israel on a kibbutz because I was in love with a woman who was on that kibbutz. And that didn't work out. But I'd had this experience of Israel. And then I returned in '83, which is just a year after the invasion of Lebanon. And I thought, well, maybe I should be in Israel. Maybe that's the place to be Jewish. And then I realised it was going to be pretty tricky as a lesbian. And really, I can't speak the language. And so I came back. And then just as luck would have it, I saw an advert. I saw an article in the Jewish Chronicle that I never used to buy, but my aunt and uncle had it, and it said that there was a program at Learbeck College you could explore being Jewish. So I started doing that, and it took me on a journey to the rabbinate. But that's the way I decided to put those two things together and want to include myself. For me, being Jewish and being a lesbian, I could not separate those, and that has been a huge struggle, because actually many people did not accept that 25 years ago, 30 years ago when I started.
Russell, could you tell us a little bit more about the relationship with Alan? How did it evolve?
Yeah, I mean, we met before any sort of relationships like that were allowed or considered to be appropriate. And we were living together from February 75 on, more or less as a what is now regarded as a partnership. When the law came in, I think December 2005, we thought, well, we're going to do it, but we don't want a big to-do, really, because in a sense it's so late. So in January 2006, we went ahead with a very small event, really, with two lesbian friends and my first boyfriend, the one from Italy, and his boyfriend, and my oldest brother and his wife came, so that was nice. And we had the civil partnership ceremony in Haringey Town Hall, signed all the documents, and it felt very nice to just, we had a little service of sorts, more like just made some sort of, it was non-religious, so it was just sort of commitments. But obviously a civil partnership is not traditional marriage. And if you want a traditional marriage, then this legislation that's going through now about gay marriage is very important. Probably not so important to us unless there's a practical reason. And if Alan was Jewish and we both felt strongly about needing to do it in synagogue, then we'd probably convert it to a marriage. But certainly Alan's not remotely interested in that, and I'm easygoing.
Well, as I say, I was brought up Church of England. Now, I'd always referred to it as Christianity light meets the Tory party at prayer, which it very much was. It was like, don't mention the G word, don't mention the JC word, and definitely no sex. That was my own sort of take on it growing up. I suppose, you know, my parents, I mean, especially my mother, she was at church every Sunday, so on and so forth. But I think what really turned me off it, not so much the gay stuff, which I think the Church of England's made a complete dog's bollocks of, and they seem to have a sort of vacillating position every day of the week. But I'd always, when I was adopted, one of my late mother's friends who married a German just after the war, she turned around and said to me, we didn't think you'd fit into the village being a mixed race child. And I thought it was a bit of a cheek, considering that my parents were completely fine about her marrying a German directly after World War II. But then my biological father, who's from Jamaica, people from the Caribbean actually fought on with the Brits against Nazism. I thought it was a bit of a brass neck to turn around to say that. So I'd always associated that sort of Middle England CFE stuff with what I call bourgeois racism, for want of a better word. Like one of my mother's friends, who was actually from quite a frum Orthodox background in North London, she married an Anglican and converted to the Church of England. Now the poor woman had the worst of both worlds, because from what I gather, her family sort of said Kaddish for her because she left the Jewish community. And when she arrived in Bedfordshire, it was like, well, she's not really one of us, she's Jewish, you know. So I'd always associated that sort of small town stuff with, you know, really petty, small-minded prejudice.
At the time, I was already having feelings for another girl that I was in school with, and I could never talk about it to anyone. And I mentioned it to my parents. They were like, you know, really frightened and really overreacted, and you know, I wasn't allowed to see her, speak to her, and I didn't even know what was going on. They clearly knew something was wrong, but I didn't even know what it was. By the time I came to my day of my marriage, I felt I was really sort of angry with my parents because she had come to my wedding and they didn't allow her to come to the wedding, so there was a whole blow up about it. They said to me that my marriage wouldn't work if I would keep her in my life, And again, I didn't even know why they were so angry, because we didn't have a physical relationship. It was just sort of emotional. I just felt we were really close. So the day of my wedding, I was really emotionally very distraught, and I just felt, I was marrying a stranger. And as the night wore on, I remember thinking I was getting more and more apprehensive about having sex. I knew that was something that we had to do, because I was told that's, and I remember at the end of the wedding seeing my sister-in-law and brother-in-law going home in the car and thinking, I just want to go with them, just want to fly somewhere far away. I just don't want to be here anywhere, just not to go home with this stranger. And it was very scary. I was really physically shaking, and I'm not like a kind of person that's, afraid very quick. I kind of, I'm not like this kind of girl that, but this was really overwhelming to me. It felt like inside of me, it felt this can't be right. This can't be right. And I thought, like, how did everybody else do it? And I told myself, if everybody did it, but then it was like, there's this questioning, what is.
The Jewish gay and lesbian group continues today, of course, very successfully. But in a sense, what's happened is a new internet-type group has taken over from Hinenu, called Gay Jews in London. Very big group, with hundreds and hundreds of Facebook-type members on it. And they are attracting a lot of the very young coming-out type gay Jews. And I think that has been a challenge for Jewish gay and lesbian group, which are considered fuddy-duddies, very private, need to, because people are very sensitive about gayness, there's a lot around confidentiality. You've got the synagogue, of course, Bet Klal Yisrael, which is not officially gay and lesbian, but the majority of people are probably with lesbian roots. So it's a far cry from those early days, but now we've got issues around how do all these groups work together. And I think the Jewish thing should be the bond, bringing them all together. But I don't know how well that is going to work. I haven't been too impressed with the joint working or tripartite working between these various groups up to now. It still seem to be all paddling their own canoes, and for Pride you all come together, don't attempt to interact. So that, from an issue point of view, I think that's something for the future that ought to be addressed.
I would say that in my late teens through early 30s, it played no part, Judaism. Like a lot of gay men and a lot of LGBT people, and particularly of my generation, it was, you were more or less excluded from, or you excluded yourself. You felt there were a lot of values that were not compatible with the way you thought about yourself, and there was a bit of self-hatred, I suppose. You didn't see yourself in that traditional Jewish world, really. But apart from that period of my life, Judaism has played an important role. I think less religiously than in terms of ritual. I love the ritual. And in terms of cultural studies, I am a film theorist, historian by profession, filmmaker as well. And I am very interested in the roots of my ideas and whatever. And I identify as what is called a diasporic Jew, where my identity is not through Israel. I don't have a very strong affiliation with Israel, but through my experience really as a North American Jew. So for me, New York is the big Mecca, and my worldview was very much shaped by the writers, directors, performers, Jewish performers in America, and that's still a big part of my life's work, really. Those people continually renew me and inspire me.
The first time, as a child, when I was 14, 15 or whatever, I would go out dressed female. And in the 1970s, that was cool because I had long hair. It was not a problem, although society was different, it was less accepting. I suppose, sorry, I'm losing the track here. Really the decision, the first time to go out dressed female was in about July 2010, and I'd been encouraged by the therapists to do that. So I went to Manchester, where there's a big transgender event called Sparkle, and I came out of this hotel. I remember being absolutely petrified, thinking that the national press would be there to photograph me and splash me across page 3 of the newspapers, that the police would be there to arrest me, and there'd be 50 plus yobs there to beat me up. But the world didn't stop. In fact, the world was great, and I had the most fabulous weekend. I was dressed as Bella 24/7. I remember on the way home on Sunday night, getting changed back into male mode, and it was a feeling like the last day of the school holidays, where your stomach would sink, and I really didn't want to go back into male mode, but circumstances at that stage and I wasn't ready to transition.
Is it a different discourse in the Jewish community, or if you're talking about gender issues or trans issues, are you saying that we're in a different place than the rest of the LGBT community? Do you have any?
I've never really seen transgender issues addressed in the Jewish community or adequately. I ran a session on a summer camp with kids where I was like teaching them these terms and terms transgender and cisgender and these basic things like that. And it was really the first time a lot of them had heard that stuff, or just like cisgender kids never having even thought about that. And that is what cisgender privilege is, not having to think about that. So incorporating that into a kind of Jewish education, I think, can only have positive influences in terms of our progressiveness as a people.
But that's why we need more campaigning. I mean, one of the frustrations for an old activist like me is that we've got very complacent. You know, when we were going on marches in the late 70s and 80s, we knew that we had to fight for something. We were fighting against Clause 28, which was very discriminatory against lesbian, gay people. You know, we knew that there was something we had to do. So now we're in a position where actually we're enjoying so much more inclusion and equality. We need to really be doing something on behalf of our LGBT brothers and sisters across the globe. And when we recently had the Gay Pride March, the Pride March in Brighton, I thought, where do I want to march? I felt very uncomfortable because it was just a party. And then I saw a group with Peter Tatchell, who were from Africa, Cameroon, various African countries. So, Nigeria, I want to march there.
I always tell people I grew up in London, but I didn't really grow up in London. I grew up in Stamford Hill as part of the ultra-Orthodox Hasidic community. It was like living in a bubble, very, very sheltered. I always felt like when seeing people outside, secular people living their lives, or people who are not Jewish like me, even Jewish people, but anyone not religious, I would say, it just felt like I was an outsider looking in, or inside looking out. Very much cut off and very much away from that, living in a sort of that world, that Jewish world where Jewish traditions and beliefs were really dominant in our life, in our everyday life. And we didn't know anybody, I had no contacts really much outside the Jewish community. To me, that was almost like my whole world.
The downside, what I haven't mentioned, is the dilemma that on the one hand, I have inner peace and happiness, and I'm being true to myself, and on the other hand, I'm hurting for people. Maybe I'm naive and simplistic, but really, I just want to carry on my life, having changed gender roles. Now, I've managed that, I think, reasonably well at work. So I have quite a large client following, and the reaction's been very positive. All they see, my brain and my abilities remain the same. Yeah, it's just that I present in a different gender. And so it's early days. I've only been living full-time female for 4 or 5 weeks. But there seems to be when I meet my clients or new people for the first time, I spend 5 or 10 minutes putting them at their ease, and then it's cool, not a problem. So going back to the question, I just want to carry on living my life as I was before, but in a comfortable gender role, and with my loving family around me and my Jewish heritage and identity preserved.
We could have discussions on any subjects we like. We had services, and given it was very early, really, about the beginning of the 80s, it was really special to be able to go there and just completely relax and talk and network. And I just have memories of lying by the swimming pool chatting, and it was probably some time after that I was asked to become chair of Jewish gay group. And there was a sort of gap, someone had left, and I took it over, and that was really a big jump from just being a member and going to the odd coffee evening to doing this. And there were a lot of things I was able to then do. Pride marches were really getting established in the 80s, getting bigger and bigger, and we thought, why not have the Jewish gay group bagel and cream cheese stall? And so with Alan and others from the group, we would organise this, and we'd always sell out. Had hundreds of these bagels. We had a banner, and we would march with that, and famous folk, like Peter Tatchell, were in the forefront, and so it felt like a coming out, that very special. More people came, more people saw the ads. At last we were getting on the map, and the other, I suppose, big thing for the group was the awareness that we weren't the only group in the world, and that we were the oldest, but we realised that in the US they had many groups, and the big synagogue in New York was going, and we realised there was a network in the World Congress, and that we could actually attend these conferences that they held every couple of years. And there was one in New York that was very memorable, and just a much bigger family than we realised. So that was very nice.
Personally speaking, and having only been back a few years in the UK, I think it's a great place to be Jewish and LGBT. I have had the benefit, obviously, of living in a country where it's more difficult, though not impossible, to be openly gay. Actually, it's probably more difficult to be openly Jewish in that country. And being able to live in London and have these sort of social groups, being able to make these kind of friends from all different walks of life, has been a great experience, and I'm really looking forward to exploring it further. So I can safely say that this is really a great place to be Jewish and LGBT in my experience so far.
I think it makes a difference to have to be able to have marriages in places of worship, like a synagogue, for example. Does that make a difference for you?
Yeah, definitely. I knew synagogues that held marriages before they were before they were made legal, but I think it concerns me most on terms of like a piece of legislation that discriminates against certain people, and that if it exists, it should exist in that way. And even though I personally don't want to get married, I need to respect that some people are being denied that opportunity, and that's not what we should have in a law.
Yeah. Notion of family, that's another interesting thing to think of. You had mentioned that a little bit in terms of how it's changed. Do you still feel important for young and youngish LGBT people? This is an important thing. If, for example, thinking of family, would you do you have kids? Would you like to have kids? And the whole marriage thing again. And we were laughing about the Jewish mother thing during the break.
I rang my Jewish mother during the break.
There you go. And let's remember that each and every one of you are contributing to LGBT Jewish history in the UK.